Hey everyone, welcome back. David History for the Ages here. So, the Little Ice Age or Mini Ice Age. This should be a really interesting topic. And it deals with another element of how geography impacts history. I did a live video on this a while back, but it was more on ancient stuff, and this is kind of a more end of the Middle Ages, modern world event. And if you haven't heard about it, I'm going to walk you through what it is, how it impacted things. I think it should be a really interesting topic. And please leave comments and your thoughts about it as we go through it. Maybe what you learned that was interesting or questions. I love reading the comments here on these videos. So before the mini ice age, as you saw in the previous map there was actually what we call the medieval warming period. So between about 900 and 1300 AD, we saw that the global temperature increased for a while. And to the point where, and I have this image here of grape vineyards, there were actually grapes being grown in northern England. We have accounts from upper areas of Yorkshire that had a thriving wine industry. And even there was something called the Doomsday Book, 1086. If you never heard of it before, it has to do with William the Conqueror from Normandy invaded England and all that. The Norman invasion. After the invasion, he had this thing commissioned called the Doomsday Book, which took account into everything that was going on in England. It was very, very detailed. And one of the things we see in this document is that there was very high wine production in significant numbers in England in the 13th, 12th, and 13th centuries. So that was a warming period that we had. Well, right after that warming period, then we had this mini ice age where the temperatures in the global Earth's temperature diminished quite dramatically, and it goes on for a long time. The mini ice age went from about 1300 to about 1850 AD. We don't know the exact dates. It kind of, varies around that time period, but we definitely see much more colder than average temperatures. Now, is this the first time you had a big dip in temperatures? Of course not, right? I mean, this was actually a mini ice age. It's not like one of these big glaciation periods. One of the things I talk about in my early lectures on like the Paleolithic period is the story of Beringia, right? So you have today Alaska and Russia, and then right between in Alaska and Russia, you have that waterway called the Bering Strait. Well, during one of the ice ages, the glaciation period during the Paleolithic period, this was thousands and thousands of years earlier, that water level decreased so much because of glaciers being formed that there was a land bridge there. And one theory is that's where a lot of the migration went from parts of Asia all the way into eventually North and South America. And I use that as an example of how geography impacted migration. This is something that I talk about in several of my lectures with my students. And, in that video I did on the live geography video, you see how geography, whether we're talking about a river or a mountain or a volcano or an earthquake, can impact so many elements of people's lives, whether you're talking about literature or religion or battles or politics. And so it's not a surprise that this mini ice age is going to have tremendous impacts. So, in terms of what caused it, I mean, one theory is there's a lot of volcanic explosions. And these volcanic eruptions from various volcanoes that you had obviously released tremendous amount of ash, sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere, and that's going to change the Earth's temperature. It's going to make it very often harder to grow crops and food. And so maybe some sort of volcanic eruptions played a role in this changing global temperature. There are some other ideas as well. Another factor could have been just various solar activities, right? I'm not an astronomer, and obviously I don't know too much of it, but I remember taking an astronomy class and looking at sunspots and all of that. And if there was a low sunspot activity, some people say that emits less solar energy, and small changes, even small changes to solar radiation, can impact global temperature. I've even read accounts that ocean circulation could change, right? And if you have ocean circulation changes, that can weaken the Gulf Stream, which keeps Europe warmer. And so there's all these various factors that, whether you're talking about volcanoes or the sun or things that we have no control over, that can obviously impact the Earth's climate. I tell my students this as well when we talk about geography, and I think this is a really important point. is that for all the technology we have, with all our industry and all our science and everything we have today, that if Mother Nature wants to mess with us with a tsunami, with an earthquake, with whatever, we're pretty helpless, right? Now, of course, this doesn't mean we don't have some impact on our environment and the world we live in. Of course, we do. But at the same time, compared to what Mother Nature wants to do, it's pretty humbling to say the least. All right, so then the question is, what are the impacts of this, right? And I think this is kind of really interesting because obviously you're going to have tremendous a number of famines. So we see very early in this global mini ice age period, like the 1300s, very cold, wet summers. If you have a cold and wet summer, that of course leads to less crops being grown. We see this a lot in Northern Europe in the 1300s. And so we have evidence that, millions of people starved. We see other accounts of things like tuberculosis being spread because of perhaps of malnutrition. Everyone's heard of the bubonic plague and the Black Death. And the question is, if you have this kind of weakened population from famine and other things of that nature, does that make them more vulnerable to something like the plague, right? So in other words, does food shortage weaken the immune system? And again, I'm not a doctor either, but it's something that could possibly also impact, how a cooling temperature and less food can impact things like making diseases worse. So something like that could be impacts of it. Political impacts. I think this is one of the more interesting ones. And I actually covered this before I made this video. I talk about this volcanic explosion that happened in Iceland in the 1780s. So I think it was 1783. There was a big volcanic explosion, and in Iceland, and that volcanic explosion, we know, definitely created kind of a decline in food production in France. And of course, if you know anything about the French Revolution, that obviously was a time where the French Revolution started because, in part, people were upset that there wasn't enough food. We have primary sources that I read to my students about how much of France was not well maintained and there were food shortages. So that people aren't happy, right? If you people, what's the term? I'm hangry. So, a whole population of hangry people doesn't make well if things are going poorly in a society. Even, things like witch trials, right? They're, blaming witches for bad weather and bad harvest. That could have even been it. Now, of course, are there other factors why you had witch hunts? Are there other factors why you had the French Revolution? Well, duh, yes, right? Obviously, if there was no mini ice age, would these things happen? Yes. Would the French Revolution have happened without a mini ice age? I mean, I think that's probably yes, because there are so many other factors involved in the French Revolution. But these are things that kind of make it happen maybe a little faster or more likely to happen, upset more people. There are several other examples. If you study some U.S. history, obviously Jamestown, Plymouth, people are very familiar with how bad it was. There was an account, we call it the year without a summer. It was 1816. And we actually have accounts that the Thames River in England actually froze over, right? I mean, that's pretty crazy if you stop and you think about it. Accounts of snow in June and July in parts of the US and Europe that usually don't get it. A lot of crops failing, famines, just all of these kind of things happen during these years. And so definitely, the temperature change is going to impact things all the way until the 1800s. So what happened? How did it all end? Well, obviously, it ends around the mid 1800s, and again, a volcanic explosion, maybe more solar activity. Of course, one of the big things that happens is the Industrial Revolution. And this is, of course, this idea, was it because of the Industrial Revolution that also played a role? Again, I'm not a scientist. I kind of leave all this for the scientists to think about and discuss. But what I do know for sure is that what this whole story shows us is that no matter how much we think we have an impact, again, Mother Nature probably has a much bigger impact than anything we can do. And this map, this graph that I'm kind of leaving with you guys here, is pretty powerful because this shows human population growth. And what you see is once the Industrial Revolution hits and the global temperature increases, food production increases, the Industrial Revolution, of course, makes it ability to create a lot more food. The biggest thing this is going to do is infant mortality is going to drop dramatically. And as infant mortality declines and people are living longer and more technologies, you see a massive growth in human population. Now, this gets to a whole other topic, which I'm not going to do here in terms of what does this mean and so forth. But definitely, there are many impacts of this mini ice age. And now that the mini ice age is over, it's also had impacts. Maybe another video for another day. But, I hope you found all that interesting, some things to think about. And please like, share, leave comments. I always like hearing people. Watch several of my other videos. I have a lot of other kind of short history lectures that you can learn from and enjoy. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thank you for watching.